All right, here, Dr. D's Social Network podcast here with one Miss Lorraine. Lorraine, beautiful to see you.
Beautiful to see you too, Darian.
You have like a great presence. Like before I pressed the button, I was like, man, just such a nice person. I feel this presence of niceness, like,
Thank you. I felt that too about you. It's
oh,
really
that's
great.
great. So I want to talk about the early you starting out here and kind of your rise through the ranks of work. And I know you do some conflict resolution, conflict work conflict, but let's
I
let's do
do.
the rewind machine and go backwards. Where does this
Okay.
career begin for Lorraine?
Well, the career actually begins when I had a different career. I was a tenured professor at a community college
Mm.
and teaching English as a second language. And loved my students, loved teaching, and always taught them things like it's okay to make mistakes and how to be a good global local citizen, as well as English. And I was so happy to be tenured and to be a full professor and all of that. And unfortunately, like too many academic settings, it was extremely toxic, just
Mm.
a toxic workplace. And I was bullied and mobbed there and
Wow.
ended up with PTSD. It was not my students ever, but there's a fear of change and a fear of excellence, unfortunately, at schools, which really startled me.
We got to talk
But
about this. This is like a big thing. And I was in academia for a long time too.
oh
And early
wow,
and I this bothers me. Like and I think this needs to be exposed. Like, so let's dive deeper into that. Sorry to cut you off, but I think this is important. I think this is something because I think there's kind of a smoke and mirrors thing going on with this.
yes. I agree. Well, when I got my master's in teaching, first I was a freeway flyer, as we call it, running around to a million different colleges in the Bay Area.
Yeah.
And it was exploitative in a lot of ways because we were underpaid and we weren't paid for all the time we put into correcting papers and meeting with students. But I didn't realize at the time that the benefit was you got to slide by a lot of the politics. And I'm sure many of those schools were dysfunctional too, but I never had to deal with it.
Mm.
And then when I was a tenure track professor, I was running a department, and oh my goodness, the shocks from the very beginning, and it got a lot worse later when I didn't have a good division chairs shielding me from some of the bleep.
You said resistance to change. Can you talk about that? I think it's an important topic to discuss.
Yeah, I always had this illusion that colleges and universities were bastions of free thinking and curiosity and embracing new ideas.
No.
And what I discovered, it was not like that. There were certain individuals like that, but there was a feeling that anything that changed was going to be bad. And some of it had to do with privilege, the mediocre white man syndrome, that
Mm.
anything that changed or gave more opportunities to women and people of color and lesbians and people from different backgrounds was somehow going to take away from their automatic pass.
Mm.
And I think that was part of the, and there were women who were part of that. I called them the icy blonde coterie at my school. And it was it wasn't until I'd experienced a lot of the bad effects and I actually started doing forgiveness work, praying for them because I
Yeah.
was so angry. I felt like it would destroy me if I didn't
Mm.
deal with
Yes.
it inside. And after I prayed for a long list of people for years, as well as praying, get me out of here. But as one of the side benefits I got from praying for them was I found some compassion at a distance. It wasn't that I thought what they
Right.
did was
Right.
right, but I realized that someone like me, who was a change agent, who was super competent and creative and different, and was pushing for the organization to follow their mission statement about diversity and everything
Yes.
else,
Yes.
was felt like a threat to their survival, like they were going to be annihilated if I won. And so they felt justified in doing anything to stop me because they felt like their survivals were at stake.
Yeah. Um, so this leads me to the concept of tenure. All right, so I think this should be talked about. I mean, you were tenure, but is it and is it still a thing to do? You think should we still have tenure, or is it just an old idea?
Well, personally, I think that tenure is a good idea
Okay.
because if you are trying to truly educate people and help them think and feel and be full citizens of the world, um, the people who don't like that have a much harder time getting rid of you if you have tenure.
Yeah.
And so I do think it's powerful and helpful. However, in my case, it just meant they couldn't get rid of me. It didn't mean they weren't trying to very easily. It
Yeah.
didn't mean they weren't trying to destroy me. So for me personally, it made it very hard to walk away. I mean, that's the golden reward for all the years of being a freeway flyer and an
Right.
adjunct and everything, and having summers off and benefits. It
Sure.
sounds so wonderful and job security. I mean, who has that? It's
Right.
amazing. But it definitely wasn't enough to keep me safe.
Yeah. No, it makes a lot of sense. It feels like there's sometimes things, traditions that last that I think it's good to question to go, okay, we should revisit things at least and say, does this still stand in today's society or
Yeah.
things of that nature? And I think college, and we'll move on to other stuff, obviously, but like, what do you see in terms of the value of college at this point for people working there and the people who are the consumers, the students,
Yeah. I mean, I think it's awful how much it costs to
Oh,
go to college.
terrible.
I do think that, call it a liberal arts education or something that exposes you to a whole bunch of
Right.
ideas,
Right.
is valuable for your whole life,
I
no matter
agree.
what
I
you
agree.
do. And some of the kinds of training you can get in engineering and math and everything are incredibly valuable. However, I think that it's really important that there be alternatives. I mean, there's really people who can be highly skilled through what are called vocational
Hmm.
training programs, do very important work. And I think that needs to be valued equally with
I think
college.
so. I worked in both environments, kind of your traditional 4-year institution, 5-year, and vocational schools. And what was interesting, I found was when I was in the kind of your traditional thing was a lot of theory and people, professors who actually didn't really work in the field on the ground level in the subject they were teaching, but taught a lot of theory about being in practice. And then in vocational schools, people who work in the
Mhm.
environment, but don't necessarily have a huge amount of academic background in what they're
Yeah,
doing. And I wish there was like a better mixture of those things, and not a huge,
absolutely.
so much emphasis on research, which is good, but not to the detriment where like students are not actually getting taught by those. They're just the teachers. I'm doing research. Here's the TA.
Yeah.
You,
Well, a lot of professors at four-year colleges, see, my program, I have a master's in teaching.
right,
English as a second language. So at least gave me a foundation of thinking about how do people learn?
right.
How do you teach them? And if there's one thing I know, and the research bears this out, is the more you can connect the theory and the concepts to real life and
Yes.
actual situations, the more people learn. And I always tried to do that in my classes. And now I teach conflict management. I created a program for working professionals
Yes.
at Sonoma State University. And it's always very, introspective, discussing how does this apply to your work? Because I know that's how people learn and really
Yeah.
take in the theory and the basic ideas.
Most definitely. So after this long journey in academia, what happened? What was the transition like? Where do we go from here?
Well, it's actually, now I can laugh at this, but
Yeah.
there was a particular moment at the college where I was forced to take part in a so called mediation that was actually an attack Lorraine meeting. where
Mm,
everyone jumped at me and told me everything I was doing wrong and how awful I was. It was just devastating.
mm.
But it also, I thought, this can't be what a mediation is. This can't be how sane people resolve conflict. And actually, and I was also praying, show me a path out of here, get me out of here. And I found out about a conflict management certificate program. So while I was still full time at the school, I took one class, absolutely fell in love with the field, took the whole certificate program. My brain was like exploding with all the new ideas and how it fit in with things that I'd already been doing, and started planning to get the bleep out of there. Um, and because of all my teaching experience and because I taught my students so many things besides English,
Yeah.
the program I was in offered, they had some teachers retiring, and they hired me to teach conflict management, which was, oh my God, I didn't have to disguise my teaching as grammar or writing or reading anymore. I could really teach the things that I love to teach. So I started, teaching there. I had a very solid, practical plan to slowly get myself out of the college, and it fell apart. They were supposed to let me, cut down to part-time, but I knew they were going to screw me, I could tell.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I just left with this baby business that I didn't know anything about how to run, and one class at Sonoma State.
Wow. You took the leap.
I did. And I was old enough, and they had a program they don't even have now where you could take an early retirement and still get some money.
Yeah.
So I knew I would have some income, which really, really helped. But it was, I think, walking away from tenure was the hardest thing I ever did. Even though
Wow.
after I left, I thought, my God, how did I stay there so long with all the psychic assaults? And I mean, I was lucky that I didn't get a debilitating illness or never be able to work again. It was that intense, even though I
Wow.
tried to take care of myself while I was there.
Do you think you would have ever ended up in working in work conflict without that conflict?
I don't know. And I actually, one of the things that question gets me to do is I have to be grateful for everything that happened at the college. I
Right.
mean, it was awful. I don't wish it on anyone, but I think if that horribleness hadn't happened, I might have just stayed. I mean, I had summers off. I loved my students, and it wouldn't have been a tragedy, but it would have been really sad because my soul is supposed to do this conflict management
Yeah.
work. And so I'm so grateful for the way things unfolded. It was a much bigger plan than I could see.
Yeah.
But I'm very grateful for the whole thing.
I mean, it sounds like your soul was just getting eaten. This
It
place.
was. It
You're just
was.
withering away.
My poor inner child. She was,
Yeah.
I was doing therapy. I was getting, I was doing EMDR work for,
Wow.
rapid, to try
Yeah.
to keep me sane. I was praying. I was
Yeah.
doing all this stuff, and my inner child couldn't bear it. And she was so mad at me for making her go back there day after day. And the only thing she asked me that I could do, she asked me to wear pink.
Oh,
And
okay.
I wore pink every day for my last year there.
Wow. That's a commitment.
Yes. And
That's a
sometimes I
commitment.
negotiated with her, well, this scarf has pink in it. Is that
Yeah.
enough?
Yeah. Wow. You were really
Yeah.
going through it. Like
Oh
you,
my
but
God. It
like that's what
was,
people do though. Like they stay in terrible situations, like it
yes.
happens so often. And I'm sure maybe you're seeing this in your work, maybe on some level. So how do you
Oh,
grapple with that with other people dealing with it?
yeah. It's really interesting. Because I write a blog at conflictremedy.com. I've written over 140 blog posts at this point.
Nice.
And one of the topics I do write about is bullying and mobbing. And I wrote this one blog post in 2010 called The Injury of Mobbing in the Workplace. And I
Mm,
still get clients from it. And I actually never really wanted that much to work with people who were being bullied and mobbed because at first it triggered me all over the place. But I felt compelled to write about it and teach about it because it's not known. It's getting better, but it's not known as well as it needs to be of what happens to people. And oh my goodness, the stories my clients have told me. I wrote another blog post called The Craziness of Mobbing in the Workplace.
Hmm.
And if I didn't know my clients weren't lying and had experienced some of the things myself, I would think they were making it up because it sounds so extreme and bizarre. And actually, I know I told you I've written a memoir now about my life. And one of the chapters, I try to find some humor in all these things. It's called College of Darkness, sort of the Gothic part.
College of
And
Darkness.
it was the last piece I wrote, not the last thing that's in the memoir. And I just cried and shook through the whole first draft of it. And then after I'd finished it, the very first thing I thought was, I can't publish this. No one will believe me. It sounds too crazy. And but it happened to me, and so many wonderful clients who, some of them people of color or immigrant women or white women or lesbians or gay men. Those are the ones I've worked with who wanted to do a good job, who were brilliant and competent and amazing. And people would feel threatened by them, or women in the trades I've worked with also. And they just, the stuff that happened to them, and it's very hard to deal with. And one of the reasons I don't really like doing that work as much, although I'll always tell people if they come to me, is there's so few happy endings. And you know, in my college, the one that, not mine anymore, thank goodness, but I've gotten several phone calls. There'd be people who remembered me and they would tell someone who was going through what I was going through to call me. And I'd always listen and validate what was going on, and they would talk about suing. But I know people who sued that college and won, but it didn't change anything. Because they cloned themselves in terms of the faculty and the administrators. They were so resistant to change, more than even most schools. And I always told them the best revenge is to get out and create a good life for yourself.
I mean, that's great advice. I think that's really great advice. I think the larger question is, how common is workplace conflict? Do we have numbers for this, statistics, ideas? I'd love to know. I mean, I used to run a club for a very long time, a fitness club, over a decade. And I was lucky I was in charge, and I was able to create a very warm, loving environment. So it's kind of in a bubble, but I wonder on a larger scale, how common is this?
Well, it's everywhere. What I like to say, you know, when I teach some of my introductory workshops and classes, one of the first things I say to people is conflict is normal. When there's groups of people, they gossip, they like to eat together, and there's conflict. So the key isn't, is there conflict? It's, how do you navigate conflict? How do you deal with it? And it's why I love teaching and coaching so much more than mediating, which I don't do much anymore. Because what I want to do is give people the skills to navigate conflict. You know, I like to use graphics in my presentations for the slides, and I have one that shows firefighters putting out a big fire. And I say, I get called into organizations to put out these big conflagrations, and I'm good at it. But I'd much rather help people get the tools they need so they don't end up with this huge split, you know, rage, resentments, and that they don't ever have to go to that place.
Right. No, I mean, it makes a lot of sense. If you're aware of like that, people, I don't know if you're paying attention to it. It seems like a lot of people are quitting their jobs all across the United States. So what do you make of this? Is this like a kickback to the toxic workplace culture? People have had enough. Maybe it's related to the pandemic. What do you make of this?
Well, you know, I'm not an expert in this. I can only say from my observations, but I think it's a combination. I think, you know, the US in particular has a culture of, you're supposed to work all the time. You're not supposed to take time off.
It's so crazy.
To sacrifice everything for your job because that's what makes you successful. And I think having to be home made more people realize that wasn't true,
Yeah.
and that they needed more boundaries and needed more balance. And if their bosses that didn't accept that concept of work-life balance, and we're humans first and we need peace and love as well as work, then I think people have left
Yeah.
because of that. And I do think so many people leave because of unresolved conflicts that no one knows how to deal with. It just keep getting worse, or because they're being bullied and mobbed and no one's sticking up for them, or addressing it or recognizing what's going on. So I can see how being away from a toxic workplace would help people realize that they just don't want to be there anymore.
Yeah. And you know what's interesting? I think people are less willing to deal with mediocrity in a job or like really poor work environments. Whereas like my parents' generation, my grandparents, like, there was a pension. There was something at the end that said, hey, even if it's terrible, you're going to come out on the end with money. You're going to be fine. You can retire.
Yes.
Obviously, all of that went away, most of it. But I feel like a lot of people now, like, even if
Yes.
the monetary aspect is a thing, they're always like, so what? Like, I'll just quit anyways. I'll figure it out. I think that
Yeah.
scares employers because they don't have the leverage anymore. Because the leverage was you make a lot of money here. And the younger people, especially, are like, and you better treat me right. Like,
Yes. And actually, I think this is a really good thing, because it's
me too.
forcing organizations to look at it. How do I treat people with respect? How do I give feedback and help people improve rather than just judging them?
Yeah.
How do I truly not just hire diverse people, but have diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging? How do we promote that? So, people who might just want to brush that off can't.
Right.
So
Exactly.
that's the good part of it. Of course, there's still people, frontline workers and et
Yes.
cetera, who don't have that luxury. And
Sure.
they still deserve more respect and more money and better treatment than they're getting. It's a different issue.
Now you mentioned about, let's say, especially people in academia, this kind of like, hey, we're threatening my lifestyle or the way things have always been. Is this because of fear in their mind, you think? What have your thoughts about this, diving deeper into that?
Absolutely. Well, there's a book. Oh, I wish I'd looked up her name. But she wrote a book. Let's talk about race. And then she wrote a second book, and the subtitle, it's about mediocre white men, the
So funny.
phenomena. And I think that, and I've heard this from other people, that white men have gotten, not all white men, but some white men who are mediocre, have gotten unearned privilege. And
Mm,
I certainly noticed this myself in my job, that I had to work twice as hard as the men to get
of
any
course.
recognition or respect. Even though I was being paid the same because that was mandated, there were
Yeah.
people there still, and this wasn't that long ago, who thought that a woman should not be a leader, shouldn't be in charge, particularly if she
It's
was super
crazy.
competent and outspoken and not deferential. And I have not been like, oh, you're a white man, I will bow down to you and not
Yeah.
say what I think if you're full of, BS.
Yeah.
And so I think that for people who've gotten a pass their whole lives, they've skated along, just, you know, they do one little thing right, and everybody's like, oh, whereas women are doing all these things right, or people of color are doing all these things
Sure.
right, women of color, men of color. And it's like, oh, okay. Um, I think that they're terrified. There's some part of them that knows they might not make it to the top if
Yeah.
it's a really level playing field. Oh, that
Mm.
that was a mixed metaphor, but you know what I mean.
Yeah. 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 I think it's a kind of a microcosm for our society. Whereas, for a very long time in the United States, there's been a large suppression of women, people of color, obviously people of different genders and identities. And there's a shift happening. And the people who have always have been in the leadership roles or have been in power, to me, is like all of a sudden you start seeing something slipping away, kind of, and you're
Yes.
creating the narrative, and the narrative is starting to be written by other people and changing. People do this all the time. They start digging in and have really crazy points of view once they're threatened. They feel threatened.
Yes, you're so right. And sadly, many women, particularly white women, have bought into this narrative as
That's
well.
crazy.
I know it
Seriously.
is, but they really think, oh, he's so amazing because he's a man. I've experienced this so many
Yeah.
times, for myself and others. It's they don't it it's brainwashing, really.
Yeah.
People grow up that way and think that. And we all have shadow spots,
Sure.
ways
Of
that we make
course.
assumptions about people that we don't even recognize. I'm humbled every day realizing things I don't know and unconscious prejudices I have, but
Yes.
I do my best to bust them and then teach other people what I learned.
You know what's interesting? I've talked to a lot of people in academia on this show, and one of the things I tell scientists, especially, I'm like, one of the problems with academics is like you spend all your time in academia, like you got a science communication problem. You need to actually get out there and be among people and not be in the ivory tower all the time and just doing research and being around just your colleagues. Like people don't identify with you. That's a
Yes.
big problem. And that's with anybody who is in some version of a silo in their life.
Yes.
Like it's one of the reasons I love doing the show. I talk to literally all types of people. It's hard for me to have weird ideas when I'm talking to so many different people who are teaching me so many different things about different
Yes.
aspects of life. And if you're not doing that, it's really you're closing your mind to the world. You're just
You're
stunting your
right.
development.
Well, and one of the things about science that I think even the people I like, Dr. Anthony Fauci, who I have tremendous respect for, and all these folks,
Right.
is that from things that I've learned and studied, is that facts don't convince people.
It's
Those
true,
of us
actually.
who honor facts and the truth, think that just explain it well enough, people will get it. But
Oh,
most people make decisions. It's emotional.
it's
So
emotional.
it's, can you tell them a story about it? Can you make it real? Can you make them want to be part of something?
Yeah.
And you can try from now until sundown to convince people using facts, and it will not work because it's not the nature of neurobiology and how we change.
We're storytellers. We sit around, we talk to each other. Hopefully, oh, maybe not as much now, but but we need that when it's hard. Like if you get around someone and maybe you disagree with, but then you like see them and you feel their goodness. It's hard to be mean, and you're
Oh
like,
my
oh
goodness.
man, maybe I should rethink this.
There's a commercial that I saw years ago, and they recently, someone posted it on Facebook, and it's a Heineken ad.
Yeah.
Um, and it they recorded these people who, like someone who was an ardent feminist, and someone who thought woman's place was in the home, and someone who was soldier, anti-trans people thought they
Yeah.
were, and a trans woman. And then they showed us that, but they didn't tell them that. Instead, they put them together and they had to build a bar, right? So they built a bar,
Wow.
literally constructing it together. Then they showed the people their videos. And then they had a choice to sit down and drink a beer and talk or not. And it was amazing because the the soldier who hated trans people and the trans woman, they'd both been soldiers actually.
Yeah. Wow.
And they bonded so beautifully. And it's a perfect example of what you were just talking about, Darian, of when you get to know, when you build something together, or you're get to know your neighbor, or you really talk to people, you can't just assume they're a certain way. You can't just reject them as the enemy in the same way. And I write about this a lot, about, who's an enemy and how can we
Interesting.
turn them into friends.
So I like that. Who was an enemy? Can you expand further on that? I'd like to hear more about that. Like, do we
Well,
feel like we do this a lot? We make people enemies without ever meeting them on it.
yes, I've actually written about this quite a bit. I wrote one blog post called "The Flags and Flowers of the Enemy," which
Hmm.
was about neighbors that I saw flying, like aggressive American flags
Yeah.
in a way that made me think they were very right wing. And yet they had
Yeah.
these beautiful gardens. So how could I hate them when they had created this
Yeah.
beauty in their front yard? Or there's a wonderful TED talk. I can't remember the name of the woman, but she's a legislator in some Northern European country. And she did a TED talk called Why I Have Coffee with People Who Send Me Hate Mail.
Love that.
And there's another woman who was in the, oh God, what's his name? The minister who, would picket gay
Hmm.
funerals. Anyway, I wrote a blog post on her called Civil Conversations with the Enemy.
Yeah.
And it's all about if you can sit down and talk to people and see that they're multifaceted, that they're humans
Yep.
who want to be loved, who want to feel safe, who want to have meaning and purpose in their lives. It's a lot harder to just, write them off.
Yeah. When you see people as just like objects instead of humans. Daryl Davis, he's done great work in this, where he goes basically into bars and different places, kind of rough areas, but are populated by people who are like associated with like the KKK,
Wow.
Aryan Nazis, and I guess he's like turned like over 200 plus people from those organizations.
Wow.
And all he does is he goes in there and he has a beer with them, he chats with them, they listen to jazz, and and initially they're aggressive with him, but he just keeps talking to him, and he's like, it's amazing to watch them come back to the bar to meet with him, and they go, I had to give up this outfit and everything. I can't, I'm talking to you and I can't believe that I think this way. It's
Yes.
just like the power of meeting people.
Oh, that's beautiful.
It's,
Well,
you know
please, after we get off the podcast, please share his name with me so
Yeah, it's really
I can look
amazing,
him up.
actually.
It
Yeah, it's like
is.
just the power of like going in and say, I know it may feel rough in the beginning because people are gonna judge me for how I look, but like if
Yes.
I just stay with it, and if I'm nice and I just have,
Yes.
it's hard to kill kindness, man, once you exhibit it to people. It's because it changes people inside.
It
Like, how can you be
does.
this nice? Like,
Yes. Well, one of the things, I have a little section in my memoir that's called the poster couple, the lesbian poster couple, because
mm-hmm.
this was a long time ago where there was a political campaign and we were trying to get the right to marry, which we
Yeah,
now have.
right.
So my wife and I did talks. I called it the poster. Here we are, the
Yeah,
happy, healthy lesbian couple in love,
right.
and we just want to get married like everyone else. And some people were hostile and a
Mm,
lot were supportive, and but they couldn't think about it the same way after they met us. So that's, it's, and um, I've had that experience as a lesbian many times, and
yeah,
also as a Jew. There's still, when I was growing up, there were people who
right.
thought Jews had horns and tails and had killed JC, and they were the enemy. And
It's crazy.
it is crazy, but and it doesn't survive true contact
No.
for the most part. And one other thing I wanted to say about this, when I redid my website some years ago now, but here I was, mostly wanting to reach out to corporations and nonprofits and be very professional. And I knew I wanted to talk about love, because part of my approach to conflict management is about love.
Yeah.
And I was so scared to do it. I thought people would laugh at me or whatever. And finally, I gave myself a good talking to and said, look, if you don't say who you really are, you're not going to attract the people who want what you really are offering.
Right.
So I took a deep breath and talked about love and spirit and inner child and
I
all
mean,
kinds of things.
love is amazing. I mean, it's probably one of the greatest things about being alive.
It is.
And it was interesting. I've had a few pastors on, and then we talked about, I want to talk about like, hey, dwindling membership of churches and kind of this antithetical aspect of like, listen, it's supposed to be about love God, love others, not judging people on their sexuality and all these other things that it's about loving people.
Mhm.
And And I like to call people to that because I'm like, listen, it's really simple if you think about it. If you're nice, you care, and you love people, your
With
life is gonna
passion.
impact. You're gonna have a pretty nice life
Yes.
because people aren't gonna always feel like you're after them or that
Right.
you're presenting some version of hostility towards them all the time. Like
Oh,
if you're just nicer, like just be a nice person, and it's not that hard. Like
yes.
think in your environment, you were in college. If everybody would have just been nice, you would have never left. You would have been fine, you know?
Yes. Well, my mind's going in a million different directions from what you said, but one thing that I teach and work on with my clients is forgiveness and letting
Mm-hmm.
go of grudges, because when people are holding grudges, they can't resolve the conflict. And most of it is inner work of
Yes,
understanding that there are malicious people, of course,
of
but most
course.
people aren't. They're just doodling along their own story
It's true.
about what happened and living their lives and not even realizing the impact they have on you. So I do a lot of work with, looking at where the emotional triggers, when someone triggers you, where those come from, and how can you let go of the grudge and meet this person now. And it's very powerful work, and it's deeply connected to love.
Most definitely. So tell me, I think this would be good for our audience, people who may be struggling with another person, having maybe regular conflict. How will they approach this person to try to, maybe it's not resolved completely, but to have a better communication in approaching maybe someone who they have a lot of conflict with?
Yeah, great question. Well, the first thing is not to approach them. The first thing is to do your inner work and really look at the kinds of things we've been talking about. Okay, why am I getting so upset at this person? Is it really about them, or is it about experiences I've had in the past? What are they doing? And what's the story that I'm telling myself about what they're doing and what their motives are, and what they are wanting to have happen? And when you kind of look at that, you can see some of the ways that we're thinking things that aren't true or that may not be true. So I do a lot of that work with people first. Of, what are you feeling? Okay, let it out, vent it. Why are you thinking that? How might the other person see that? What do they think's going on? And so I do a lot of work individually with people. Then often what happens is their hearts have opened already before they even talk to the person, and they can listen. I teach listening a lot. You mentioned listening as well. To listen with curiosity instead of trying to pounce on what they say. And when I do that, when I do it with both people and bring them together, or even with just one, conflict coaching, I sometimes say, is conflict resolution for one,
Yeah,
like tea for one. It changes the tone of the conversation so much. And then if you listen to people, and my one of the things I say a lot is my students and clients say, well, why should I listen to them? They're the ones who run. So I always tell them, if you're taking a class with me or getting coaching with me, you already know more about this than they do. And with
mm,
greater knowledge comes greater responsibility. So you have to step up and do more initially, but you'll get the reward.
yeah.
And so when people do that, it's absolutely amazing. The miracles I get to witness are so cool. I'll give you an example if you like.
Yeah.
Um, I got hired by someone who owned a smallish business. He wanted to sell the business to two of his top workers, and they were interested in buying it. And the two of them had this huge blow up and weren't even speaking to each other. And he hired me as like a last minute desperate effort to save the jobs of these 12 people
Yeah.
and to have it go through. So the first thing I did was meet with them individually. And they each had some genuine grievances and things that were wrong and hurt places and wounds and anger and everything. And I deeply listened to them and empathized and about how hard that was, because they were both wonderful people, and they were missing each other. So then I ever so gently, I call it ever so gently kicking their butts,
Yeah, yeah,
that I said, well, what if the story you're telling about this isn't true? What if, this might be, how would you feel about that? Or can you see where someone who wasn't like you might interpret this, all those kinds of
yeah,
things, still inner work. And they would go, oh, wow, that never occurred to me. You
yeah.
know? And then with these people, then after we'd done, I think 3 sessions with each of them separately, I brought them together and they started being able to talk to each other. And it was so beautiful. They signed the papers, the business sale went through. And I'm still working with them, just doing tune-ups, but they're in bro love with each other.
Bro,
So,
love.
so appreciative and
Yeah,
respectful of each other. They hardly need me anymore, which is wonderful. But you would never have predicted they would get there from how angry they were at first and how much
yeah.
they felt like the other was the enemy.
Well, too, also, that's a wonderful story. I think also we don't grow up learning about conflict resolution. Like our parents are not exactly teaching us this stuff. I mean, we feel like, I think as a society, we put all this in, like pressure, like, okay, your parents should teach you all this stuff. But what if your parents don't know it either? And
Oh,
that's the case with a majority of people in my experience my observation, it's just not being taught.
yes.
So you
Oh,
just start doing stuff.
you're so right. And this is something I teach my first workshop too. I put up ABC blocks and
Yeah.
I say, none of, there's no, most of us don't learn this in our families. There's no graduation requirement from high
No.
school in conflict management, or most professional programs don't have it. And so we latch on to what our parents did or what our boss did. And I talk about, um, there's a quote, I can't remember who said it, but to a hammer, everything looks like a nail.
Yeah.
So most of us just have these little hammers and we're trying to deal with conflict with the hammers when we need a whole toolkit. Sometimes you need a hammer, sometimes you need a level or a screwdriver or pliers, and so my whole goal is to help people learn what they weren't taught,
Yeah.
and be able to be different and have the skills. They're not even soft skills, although they're sometimes called that. They're like
Yeah.
essential survival
Essential.
skills.
Exactly. Like we got to reframe that. Because think if like all children were at least given this opportunity in school growing up, conflict resolution, financial management, all this stuff, right? How to cook
Yes,
for yourself, actually, all these
yes,
things. Your country is going to be a better country when you're producing people who are more self-assured, know how to handle personal situations going on in life, more fiscally responsible. This makes so much sense, but it's not being done. It's just
no,
crazy.
it is in very limited ways. There's a program called School Ambassadors and some other programs
Yeah,
that actually in different ways teach younger students
yeah,
conflict management and circles, restorative
yeah.
justice circles. And I have worked with some people who have experienced this, and they're so much more capable of
Right.
resolving conflict than most of us.
That's why. So it would be great if this was a larger scale thing,
Yes.
because it's one of those things that seems so obvious, but like as a larger scale thing, we're just not doing it. There's things like you're like, well, this seems obvious, but then it's done in pockets, you know.
Yes.
And I wish that wasn't the case, but hey, at least we got to start in some places, I mean,
Yeah.
that's
Well,
a
we do what
positive.
we can.
We do what we
You do it with
can.
your podcast and other
Right.
projects, and I do it with my work and my writing. And we it does feel overwhelming, but I really believe that when we put our light in the world, we don't know how much it ripples out and radiates, and
Well
we
said.
can only do our part.
Man, and you know what? That's a great way to end it. I mean, what a great thing to say to end a podcast. Lorraine, you're a wonderful person. You seem like you just shine. You do have a light. Your smile, your whole being, I feel it. It's amazing. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you. And I just want to put a plug in for my
Do it.
memoir, Angels and Earthworms: An Unexpected Journey to Joy, Love, and Miracles. And it's going to be out soon. And if you contact me, I can put you on the list to get, notices about it. And would love to come back sometime.
Of course. How do people get in contact with you? What's the best way?
Well, my website is conflictremedy.com, and that has my blog and my ways to contact me. And I do have a landing page for my memoir, which is a little bit long. But I'll just say it: https://angels-earthworms.aweb .aweb.page.
There we go. Awesome. What a wonderful time to spend some time. I mean, it's always a joy speaking to everybody I get to, but this was a true pleasure. Thank you so much, Lorraine.
Oh, thank you, Darian. What a wonderful time I had talking to you.
That's great. We'll be in touch.
Okay.